All right.
All good.
Yeah.
Oh. Okay, so all right, where's the button? Here we go. Oops,
Quiet on the set.
and we're recording. Yama, g'day, and welcome to Discord Discussions, our second series of the Roundtable Conversation. First, before we begin, I'd like to thank the brain children behind our second series, Jules, Connie, Polly, Nasay, Kevin Green, and all the support that we've been getting from the KBS Discord family. Thank you very much. So here we are, ready to go round again, and we're just going to get straight into it. And I'm a bit lost because we've had a very hard year so far, but here we are trying to do it. And we have Nasay to join us today. G'day, Nasay.
And his computers.
And his computers. And we have Connie and Joe and Jules and Leah and Malia and Polly all joining us in the room today in our conversation. So we're just going to get straight into it like we normally do. And today's topic is cycles. So we arrive in this place due to a cycle. And from that moment on, all that we encounter in this life is cycles. There are different ones. There's ones that last beyond our time here on Earth, and there's ones that we witness and take part in every moment of our lives. There are different cycles like growing cycles, motorcycles, moon cycles, you name it, there's a cycle for everything. So why do we automatically associate a cycle with a circle? And what happens when we take a corner in a cycle in our lives? And do we see our lives as a straight line or a cycle? Sometimes we break a cycle. And is that a cycle in itself? Do we recognise where we are in our own cycles? And does this change the things in the temporary and permanent things of our lives? So these questions and more we're going to look into today, and the beautiful thing of cycles. So who wants to go first?
I have so many things to say about what you just said regarding cycles, because everything is a cycle. Like, I would challenge anybody in this, even in the future, if anybody comes up with an idea, like whatever, and 45 minutes later, that isn't a cycle, present it to me, and I guarantee you I'll be able to point it out that it is a cycle in some way. But one of the things I wanted to touch on was in your introduction, you pointed on cycles that they're too vast for us to even comprehend because we're just not simply here long enough to notice them. And what I wanted to say is there's also cycles that are the complete opposite of that, and that is that they happen so quickly that we don't even notice them. And millions of these cycles happen all the time, and we just walk through them oblivious to them.
Well, yeah. I mean, what about, like, the human body and skin? It's constantly shedding, and it's a cycle of we don't pay any attention to.
Well,
it happens so fast.
Look at quantum and look at CERN. What is their main tool or weapon, however you want to look at it, to look at things? It's a big giant circle that sends things around in cycles.
And it hits other things in a cycle from a different cycle.
Right, exactly. So, like, there's nothing on the planet in reality that doesn't, in my opinion, revolve around some kind of cycle. And I think that's why when you look at all the really important ancient knowledge, it's all very cyclical. Everything has a cycle. There's stages to go through, and then once you get past that stage, and once you get to the end, you start over again, and you go through all the different stages again. That's just how basically everything works. Which is weird because everybody thinks of a circle, and that is basically what it is. You can't really break a cycle. Yeah, you can square a circle, but if you just keep squaring it long enough, all of those squares will eventually line up into being a circle. So when you break a cycle, I think you're just dividing it into more areas of allowing it to repeat itself before the whole cycle repeats itself.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is going to be a really, really good conversation. I probably just opened like a million can of worms.
Because I was just thinking,
Absolutely.
I see a cycle when you come back to the beginning. That's your chance. That moment is your chance to either repeat the same cycle on that level or move up and move around again, but in an elevated position like a spiral.
Well, okay, then I think we've established definitely that there is definitely a relationship between something that is repetitive and a cycle, because you can't just like, even if you're repeating the same thing but it's different, you're still kind of going through the same motions of that cycle. If that makes any sense.
Just if nothing changes.
That's why when you get to the beginning, the elevation, that's when it'll change. If you choose to break the cycle and take another direction, it'll elevate you from your original one. You'll still have things similar, like Polly said, but you're going round, moving up on the spiral. If that makes sense.
That's part of a bigger cycle.
Yeah. Yes.
But
And I go.
I was gonna. I mean, it just has me thinking. So the other night when we proposed this, and we're like, "Yeah, it's coming back," I went to bed, and I thought cycles. The first thing that actually came to mind was a record. And within within a record is our songs. Those songs play, and then the next thing you know it, you're on to another song. That area in between, that magic that happens, kind of like the way life kind of, one thing ends, another begins, but there's almost no transition. It's like magic listening to a record, in the sense that you'll hear one song and then the next one automatically comes on. You do nothing. They just kind of blend in and flow in together. Kind of how I feel like we're doing right now, where we don't see it because it's going to take so long for this transition, but we're actually transitioning into another cycle, a bigger cycle than us.
And you can even take that down the other way, like more towards like the macro kind of level, and look at songs individually and how they're basically just constructed of corresponding cycles that happen to match up that in a way that's pleasing to the brain. Like, it's just beats doing repetitive things over and over again, and then you add a bass guitar that's doing repetitive things over and over
Yeah,
again.
and I
And then
think
you could take it down even smaller and be like, okay, like the bass note is basically a cycle of a wave that's going back and forth between two areas, and that's where we get the term frequency from.
yep.
And like every frequency is basically a mini cycle that just keeps repeating itself. And that's how we get things like light and sound and anything visual, even things that are like solid matter that you can touch. Like those molecules, apparently, from what we're being taught in molecular science, they're vibrating on a cycle at a level that makes them solid. That's what makes them we're able to actually touch them. That's because they're vibrating at such a high frequency, or you could say cycle, because that's pretty much the same thing in my opinion. I think there's a very blurry line in the world, cycle and frequency. It might be the same thing, is what I'm getting at.
I mean, I think a lot of people have a tendency to think cycles circular because there's so many round things that are cycles. There's a record, the washing machine, bicycle. You see all these things, and in many ways, those are wheels. And I'm kind of sitting here pondering now, how are wheels connected in with cycles? They're gears. They're how things turn. That's how cycles and change are initiated.
Well, I think it probably has something to do with math, but I'm just guessing on this. There's various cycles that happen in math that seem to correlate with reality that are really interesting. And that could probably be a whole other show, which I would probably want to do a lot more like research on, just to make sure I'm not wrong. But I think like okay, when you think of time, what I like to visualize is like it's like a conveyor belt, right? And it's really long, like nobody knows how long it is. But underneath the conveyor belt are all these little rollers, right? And they move that belt along. And some rollers are connected to other rollers in case one of the rollers fails, right? So you have like backup almost belts that are connected to each other. So the time itself is the belt, and all the cycles are what make time move forward. They're all the rollers underneath the belt. And it depends on what's standing on top of that belt, which affects how those rollers move as far as like how fast or slow they go or how often they repeat themselves.
But there are other kinds of conveyor belts. I mean, moving sidewalks. And some I used to work at a retail place years ago that, I mean, and you're right, we did connect piece to piece, but they were more of the mechanical conveyor belt where
Yeah,
you pieced them together and there were all these wheels, but they were wheels within wheels within wheels that you attached and you put more wheels on wheels on
exactly.
wheels.
Each wheel unlocks a bigger cycle. It's almost the perfect metaphor for like how everything is related to cycles. Like, I mean, I honestly can't think of anything. I've been thinking about it for 2 days now. What can I think of that is not a cycle?
Same here.
Actually, yeah.
I mean, objects. I mean, a stationary object like a random object like a glass or a phone or a cup of coffee. That's a one-time done deal. That's not a
No,
cycle.
it's not. It's not.
But
Jules, those molecules in that glass or in that rock or in that whatever your stationary object is are constantly going through a cycle of vibration. That's why they're there in the first place.
well, I looked up the definition of cycles today during my downtime when I thought I was going to have a break to think of more stuff. But a cycle is a series of events that are regularly repeated in the same order.
Mm-hmm.
That's the true
Like solid
definition.
matter.
That's the true definition of a cycle. But if something breaks a cycle, that's a new cycle or a new system and is there a difference between a cycle and a system?
I would say that a cycle is probably a really good example of a system. It's probably the oldest example of a system. But there are systems that aren't cyclical.
True.
There's a big difference between natural cycles and created cycles. And I think that we make it more complicated than it really is.
Hello, who's that?
Hi.
This is Leah. This is my adopted daughter, Leah.
Hi, Leah. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Hi.
Leah's a Darug woman, and most of us live in her land because we all live on Darug land. So,
Not mine, my ancestors.
yeah, it was yours. You were alive.
That's right. Blame it on your grandparents.
Yeah. With the cycles, whether it be a short one or a long one, time has a lot to do with it. Like I said at the opening thing about some of the cycles we don't witness. we only see a part of them because they're so vast, we're long gone before they come back around again. So we only
True.
see that cycle. And we probably don't even notice that it is part of a cycle because we only see a portion of it.
Climate change? No, I'm just kidding.
Well, yeah, which is really a great cycle. Yeah, because our people say the water was here in Australia, it's gone and now it's come back. It's part of a great cycle. It's not anything anyone can put a name on it. We always knew that the water would come back.
Well, here's a cycle. After lots of fire comes lots of water.
Yeah.
That's what happens everywhere. Look at, okay, it didn't just happen in Australia, it happened in Canada too, on the West Coast. We had catastrophic fires on the West Coast and the Rocky Mountains last year, and then the same year, catastrophic flooding. Like record breaking, never before recorded, and I'm totally just trying to sound like the media, once in a lifetime flooding that will, I mean, y'all should come out here and visit this place just to see the devastation. That kind of flooding. You know, there's money to be made from that flooding. But it happens after fires. So if you have drought one year, the next year, you might have another drought, but somewhere else it's going to be flooding. Is that part of the cycle?
Yep.
I think so.
Yeah, I think so too. So,
And I know to me, this might sound really messed up, but to me, I find these, what I think most people would call devastating natural disasters, I find them beautiful. Because to me, that's Mother reclaiming back what we've destroyed. She's regenerating herself.
yeah. And that's what I was going to
It could be purging as well.
Yeah, positive and negative cycles. What Leah just said would see, some people would see that as a negative cycle. Oh yeah, we flooded, we have fire. But other people see it as a positive one. So what is it that makes us think positive and negative cycle? That's a negative cycle, we need to break it. That's a positive cycle, let's keep it running. Like, what point do we decide that?
Well, here's the interesting thing about cycles. When you talk about positive and negative, it automatically makes me think more towards like magnetics and electrical properties of things. And if you don't have an equal negative pull on something positive, then it won't keep rotating. It won't, like, the cycle won't keep it. There won't be a cycle anymore. Everything will just become positive and everything just stop.
I mean, I hear you, Polly, but I also think that there's a spiritual side or a spiritual aspect of cycles too.
I think that spiritual aspect ties into what I was just saying. Like that's a fundamental. It applies to the spiritual aspect as well. Like you have to be comfortable with your darkest side to be able to find your brightest moments, kind of thing. Like you have to know what your opposites are, what your
True.
polarities are, in order to, and the further away you make those polarities, in my opinion, that's how you achieve growth. But that's a cycle, right? It's like bouncing a ball off of a wall and then realizing that you can take 2 steps back from that wall and bounce the ball back from that same wall, and you can keep taking 2 steps back. So you have to throw the ball farther and it has to bounce back farther. But you know that it's just going to eventually, it might take a few more bounces, but it'll come back to you and you can throw it back. That's a strange metaphor, I know.
I hear you, and I can't speak for everybody, but for me, learning, it's not accepting one or the other because they always change. It's you've got to acknowledge the positivity and the negativity, embrace the negativity and the positivity, and find balance in the middle. And when you can find balance and know when you've got to be a little bit more proactive because there's negativity around, so you've got to shine a little more, or when you can be super chill and let it go because you're around good vibes. It's a balance. For me, I grew. I became a better person when I embraced it instead of I just embrace it. It's there. It's always going to be there. You can't have light without dark, good without bad. I just embraced it and then moved on and apply it, and it's worked for me.
That would probably work for most people.
I just had a thought. So if we find balance within a cycle, wouldn't that place us in the middle? And wouldn't that mean then that we were in the middle of this, in the middle, observing the cycle going around us?
Ooh, okay. Well, okay. Because balance, that word, I think that you can't have a proper cycle without balance. It's not possible. So balance and cycles are woven together. They can't exist without the other.
Because I'm thinking too that maybe as beings we got it a little bit wrong. Maybe we should be in the middle watching the cycle go around us instead of actually fumbling around in the cycle and scratching our heads going, what the hell, where am I now?
Yeah, you know, the easiest thing for us to do is to remind ourselves we're human beings and not human
I
doing.
used to think
And
that
well,
we can't change
I mean,
cycles
we're
that are
human
like,
beings and we're not human doings. So if we be, then we can see things around us more than we thought because we're just being and we're not constantly doing.
Disclaimer, I'm not a human being.
I've been waiting to hear from you, Nose.
I can vouch for that.
And then we move into emotional cycles, so they're not only outside of us, they're within us. They're inside ourselves. And we move from happiness and around different emotions and back and move, we move through them. And they're kind of like a cycle, especially for women. We have no choice in that matter.
So if you think about like what cycles could do from a perspective of something like even as simple as Mother Nature or as complicated as nature, and you would have as many replicable cycles as possible that you could keep track of, and the ones that didn't keep repeating with the same velocity, you would just ignore them because they would be they wouldn't serve any sort of purpose to generate like a different cycle that would go longer. So like what if cycles themselves have an intelligence, and inherent in that intelligence is a strong desire to just keep prolificating, like keep continuing. Either if one cycle's running out, they need to make another one, kind of thing, like to keep it going even longer. Like a crazy musician or a drummer that is like, oh, you think it's 4/4? No, it's 6/4. Oh, you think it's 6/4? No, it's 8/4. Oh, you think it's 8/4? No, well, let's make it 12/4. Oh, you think it's 12/4? Let's make it 16/4. Oh, wait, let's throw a really weird one in. Make it 17.5.625 to 4. And because if you listen to it long enough, it is a cycle.
I understand what you're saying.
What if a cycle is conscious of itself and it knows it's going to run out, so it has to make
another one.
break the cycle or corner the circle or circle the square or whatever you want to call it to just prolong itself?
Hi, my name's Cycle and I've decided to join your life.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And another thing, why do they call it a unicycle when you can ride it in two directions?
Actually, and what about recycle?
Oh, yeah.
What did I send you last night?
Well, now we're getting into it.
I wasn't prepared for the recycle question.
Upcycle, recycle.
You're going to have to ask me that again.
What's the difference between upcycle and recycle? And have we been upcycled or recycled? There's a question.
It's a very good question.
Have we been upcycled or recycled?
Can I ask a recycled question?
Yeah.
Again.
Please do, Mace. I've been waiting for you to jump in.
Well, is a very deep subject, but cycles can be extremely distracting from the other cycles. And nothing can be more conflicting than adding another cycle to all of the cycles that we attempt to find ourselves within or without. And as we are recognizing the cycles, in my experience, the observer will determine whether the cycle is positive, negative, or neutral. When we look at the theory of the phoenix, as you were stating earlier about from the ashes something grows anew, well, to the farmer who just lost all of his crops, he's saying this is a negative cycle because he lost his crops, he wasn't able to pay the bank, and now the bank is able to foreclose on his farm. Now, the banker is like, what a wonderful cycle, because this cycle of the phoenix just made me richer with my bank. So it is particularly interesting when a group observes the cycle than from a republic or a democracy. It is decided, okay, is this positive, neutral, or negative? And where do we go from there? Do we start a new cycle? Or do we jump on one of these other ones and keep all extremities inside the cart while in motion?
There's that wisdom of silence. And
We all, like a few people have mentioned the vibrations and the energy. Don't forget, we're full of that ourselves, and we emit that so much. What cycles are we giving our energy to? Other people, our own. Like that, everything is connected. But if you're paying enough attention, there are patterns in your own life, and you can change it. The negativity part of it, you can change it by paying attention to that. And like I said, nothing changes if nothing changes. You choose what you participate in. You choose what energy you're going to. You choose who you engage with and what you engage with. And that all contributes to the cycle. And everybody being connected in that one cycle is what makes it what it is. And we've all changed it.
so your first step would be aware of the cycle. Because if you're not aware that you're in a cycle, you have no idea. You're just going around like an eddy, a river, round and round, going, what's going on. Then all of a sudden you realise, hang on, I'm going around in a cycle. Then you can pay attention to it, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's all willy-nilly until you know that you're in a cycle.
Yeah,
William McAllister.
Who's that?
I officially gave my daughter last night her cultural name. Karen told me, I knew what it was. I didn't quite have it right. And then, so I received it correctly, and her name is Nala Nanagali. And that means look and listen.
And that's what I want to get to next, our cultural cycles, because the native people, we knew about cycles. And this is where I come to the thing, cycles, why do we see cycles as a circle? And all the native people, we had circles and we knew about cycles, but we never used the actual wheel and manifested it in reality. And what was it that we knew not to bring that part? It's like, how can I put this?
Thank you.
When we made the wheel, it was like bringing those cycles into reality and manifesting it in the wheel. What was it that made the native people not do that? Was it just the fact that the ground was too rough? Oh, there's got to be more to it.
No, I think there is more to it. The idea, like not just the practical use of the wheel, okay, however it was invented or taught to whoever, however long ago you want to go back about the wheel. if you look at the symbology of the wheel, it's basically an infinite number of cycles depending on the diameter of the wheel. But the thing that holds it together is the axle in the middle. Like it's that you can't really have a wheel that's useful if it's not attached to some kind of axle that holds it in place to make it useful, right? So like the smaller the wheel you have, so the smaller the cycles you're aware of, the less likely or the less useful those cycles are going to be to you or apparent to you, I guess you could say. But the bigger the wheel and the bigger the cycle, like to me, it would represent like a more obvious, and once you get that big obvious cycle, you can start looking at the rest of the wheel, like what makes up this wheel, why is it so round, what are all the spokes, what are all the smaller cycles going on inside that wheel. So it's almost as if cycles can be taught or presented to people who are willing or inquisitive about these kind of things. It does. There's no like one direction. Like you have to start with small cycles and work your way up to the big cycles. You could easily notice a big cycle, and it could, in my opinion, easily make you think about, wait a minute, could this be scaled down to a level that doesn't take 10 years, or you know what I mean? Like it. So, but the idea of the wheel is that it doesn't matter which way you turn it. Eventually, if you put a dot on that wheel, it's always going to hit that ground at the same point, at the same time, no matter what direction you wheel it. That one dot is always going to hit the ground, depending on the diameter of the wheel, at the same point every single time. But that time is adjustable because it depends on the speed in which you're rolling the wheel. So the cycle is there, but if you don't go fast enough through the cycle, you will never see it.
Yeah.
And so it's almost like we have permission to explore cycles at our own speed, even because we can speed cycles up and slow them down now.
We can. I just had this thing while you were talking, Polly. You know that picture? I don't. Most people would have seen it. It's an old drawing, and it's of this guy. He's gone to the edge of the earth's flat and there's a dome. He's gone to the edge of the earth and he's lifted up the wall and he's looked out and he's just seen wheels upon wheels. Does everyone know that picture? Yeah? Does it ring a bell? I could bring it up and check if I wanted to. Why that picture kept flashing in my mind while you were talking, Polly. And what it was, I think it's a biblical picture, I'm not sure. I'd like kind of someone to...
Would that be Ezekiel?
Yes, and yes, I think that's it. But while Polly was talking, they were showing me that picture and they were saying to me what he saw was the cycles, within cycles. That everything is a cycle and he saw them as wheels. While you were explaining that, Polly, that's what they were explaining back to me. These are the wheels, the cycles within cycles.
Yeah, and I just had a thought, and I was going to ask a question, but I think I just answered my own question. I was going to ask if there's a difference in a cycle, in an era, or an age. I believe there are, but it just hit me that a cycle is also a term of measurement.
Yeah, a cycle in itself is like a small slice of time.
Yep.
But what's cool about cycles is they're not restricted to a certain amount of time. So in a way they transcend time, because you can have a cycle that takes 1,000 years, or you can have a cycle that takes 1,000 nano, which I think is there's another word for 1,000 nanoseconds. I think that's a redundant term, but
yeah,
whatever.
but
People can comment on that when we post it on YouTube and point out how much of a non-nuclear physicist that I am not. I welcome it. Please. I'll just make jokes out of it. Please do it.
Because if there is a nuclear physicist, I'll from you.
but Are humans the only ones who measure time with cycles? I mean, are we more
No.
aware of cycles because we
Look at a tree.
Nature has its own. Yeah, that was what I wanted to move in next. Is the nature's
Cut a
cycle.
tree in half and then make a wheel out of that tree and see how many cycles it's been through on its wheel. That's every single ring that's made on a tree is a year of going through extreme temperature changes that the tree is like not cool
True.
with, and that's why it makes those rings. If you go to the equator, the trees at the equator don't have a ring because they don't have to go through that.
So
It's
a
almost like
cycle for a tree.
they don't go through a cycle that pertains to the way we live. They go through a way long.
Yeah, I mean, there are trees. I mean, they from how I perceive a tree, and I know trees do die, but their main cycle is growth. I mean, the human cycle is life, death, recycle, reincarnate.
I would say a tree has more in common with the human cycle than you think.
I believe it does, but this goes back to the whole like cycle thing because we're only here for X amount of time. Those trees outlive us. We don't fully appreciate the cycles that they have.
Exactly. They see cycles time and time again, if you'll excuse that pun, that we won't even see. Like maybe see once in a lifetime. Those trees have stood there for like 40 of those.
So
Yeah.
that's why I pay go and talk to a tree. But even the cycle of the tree drops a seed, the seed grows, it grows, then another tree grows, it drops more seed. That replenishing life cycle in itself.
Yep. Like something has to die in order for something else to be born. It's part of the balance of the cycle. If everything just kept getting born, the cycle would slow down because there'd be too much balance on the birth side and not the death side. And you would have a lopsided wheel. And we all know what happens when you roll a lopsided wheel. It eventually stops. And it stops on the heaviest point of the wheel, which is where all the lopside is. Like that stops the cycle. When there's no balance, or when balance is really, really bad, that can stop a cycle, and then I don't know what you have after that.
It seems that it's based on balance and room. If you run out of room, it's going to slow the cycle down, which tells us there's only a limited capacity in certain areas, especially this place.
Right. It's which yeah. So like, why do they call it space?
Just running out of it. Move over, you're taking up my space.
Right?
You're taking up
Hey, get
space.
off of my cloud, man.
Speaking of taking up space, and I hope this is okay, but I can actually feel someone that's not speaking up and has something very valuable to say, and you're taking up my space by not saying it. So just say it, please.
All right, who in the room needs to say something?
It's valuable.
Oh, by the way, if you want to say something, put a little GIF up in the room with your hand up, or someone pressing a button so we know you want to talk, and we'll let you have your say. So
yeah, we promise we'll only censor you if you're being a prick.
Okay. All right. What else have we got in cycles? What about the world's state of mental cycles? We go through these psychological cycles as a whole, right? And I think the last few years has let us all pay a bit more attention to the actual cycles of our living world, as in our society, and what cycles they're sending us through.
I think there might be mental cycles that are so long that we don't have the technology to accurately measure more than 2 of.
I think so too. If they're changing history and stuff like that on us so we can't access the past properly, we don't know what kind of cycle we've had.
Well, I've heard a hypothesis that like all these wars and pandemics and like major global events all coincide with a cycle of a certain planet. Like, and the cycle would be its orbit around the sun and its relationship to us, which is probably like just those two orbits probably make like 5 different cycles. So it's like cycles can self-replicate, and there's cycles out there I think that have with like just the general psychological energy of the planet in general. Like, okay, just a prime example, a very small and localized example, but like the other night, a bunch of us were talking about how, you know, maybe it's time to get stuff back up and running with KBS and at least like try to provide something to post on the KBS YouTube channel. And the very next day, Anne comes into the Discord and says, hey, you know what? It's time to get KBS out there. Let's start doing Freaky Friday again. And I'm thinking, okay, there's no way that we can't rule out the possibility that it's just that kind of cyclical energy that wanes and goes and comes and goes. Like, that's just the cyclical nature of how things work. And we were all feeling it at the same time. So to me, that's evidence of a cycle that's like kind of under the radar. Like there's cycles of human consciousness that we're totally oblivious to. And I think that they use those, they being the people or powers that shouldn't or should be, whatever fucking we want to say about them. They use that. Like it's like an instruction booklet for them. It's like a recipe book. They use that. They use all those cycles that, you know, the ancients have been talking about for thousands of years. And they're like, oh, that's what they meant. But wait, we can't tell anybody that. So we'll just use that to our advantage and make mini cycles in between.
I agree. Do you think there's something within our being that alerts our spirit to those cycles even though we're not consciously aware of them?
I do believe that, yeah. I don't use that word often, but I do believe that. And the word I don't use often is believe, but I believe that.
So it gets me to wonder, what cycles are we in right now that none of us have any clue about? There's got to be something. We're not that smart. No one's that smart. Right? So we probably, someone's watching us going, look at them run around that cycle again. They don't even know.
I think if we could bring somebody back from like the Roman era, the Roman Empire collapse, they might be able to shed some light. And there's probably people older than that back had similar experiences, like Atlantis, that kind of thing.
Yeah, multiple civilizations have had this cycle.
Yeah, I mean, civilization itself has its own cycle, and you can see it. That's why this is such a good topic. Like, this whole topic can span so many other topics because you can find cycles in everything.
I mean, the very fabric of existence is made up in a cycle.
Yeah.
Infinite cycles, yeah. That's why that picture keeps coming back to me where he lifts up the edge of the earth and looks out past the dome and just sees all the wheels, which are all the cycles that make up everything. That's what I mean. Beyond that, there must be more. We could be living a miniature version of something greater, with greater, bigger, better cycles. And this
Beyond that, there's a monkey standing outside the box with a crank, and he's turning it.
And he's going, laughing at us, going,
Yeah. That's all it is.
And they think they come from monkeys. It's so silly. Look.
Well, that's what the hurdy-gurdy man believes.
The hurdy-gurdy man. Roly-poly, roly-poly.
Yeah, okay, that's where I was going with that. Yep.
So, what are some of the most positive cycles we could think of that we're all aware of in this world? I know laughter's a good cycle and it spreads around.
I would say pollination, and I meant that pun on purpose.
Yes.
But pollination is probably one of the most, or, crystallization, What's it called when a butterfly turns from a caterpillar into a fly and then egg? It makes another caterpillar and it freaking turns into another butterfly. That one. Whatever cycle that's called.
Pupa, chrysalis, metamorphosis.
Yeah, that cycle's cool. That's a positive cycle, I think. Any monkey on a bicycle is a positive cycle.
Well, it's wheels on wheels. There's gears that get those. Even on the chain, it's a bunch of small circles and gears.
Is that Tucker Carlson's bike?
I don't know, but I'm digging that yellow T-shirt he's wearing.
Bowel movement cycles are positive.
Well, you can find cycles in the media. You can find cycles in the weather. You can find cycles in cooking. You can find cycles in fucking children's toys. You could, I mean, anything. There, everything is almost like it's like cycles are like a building block, like a raw building block of reality. Like, don't even worry about the building blocks of life. The building blocks of like physical things all revolves around cycle.
So here's a thought that just came to me. How is it possible that some people actually are in a cycle, within a cycle, but when they analyze or an outside person analyzes, they look for a pattern? I mean, patterns are repetitive things, which are often like a cycle.
Is a pattern just not the same thing then, maybe?
Well, I mean, patterns can be taken multiple ways. Like, you have, like, a pattern, like, this is a pattern on how you're going to sew this dress or make this costume. And then there's a pattern that is, like, repetitive behavior.
I would challenge you, Jules, just because I'm playing with you right now, to tell me the difference between a pattern and a cycle.
Well, I just did, because that's how a pattern to me is like a diagram or instructions on how to make something. That's a pattern. That pattern, that's kind of similar. That for me, that makes me think that a pattern is something that you follow instructions, a diagram, a guideline. But like in mental health or in behavior, it's a pattern. So it just seems like in one of those two scenarios, one of the applications of pattern is misplaced.
Okay, so because what I think of when you say the word pattern, most basic pattern I can come up with is a chessboard, like the checkers, right? There's a black square and a white square,
Yes.
and each row has a pattern, but each other row, like if you skip one row, they all repeat the same pattern. So as far as like when you're talking about like a mental health thing, if you're repeatedly doing the same thing and it's well, whatever, it's causing not the desired result, then wouldn't that be a recognition of pattern, like, or a cycle?
Yes, but I guess for me, I was just having a mental moment where I was thinking, and it's like cycle. I see a similarity pattern, but I also see it differently too.
Well, all I think we're doing here is accenting the importance of the relationship between cycles and things that are cyclical. Like, when you think of cyclical, you think circle, and everything's a circle. Like, according to physics, if you're in zero gravity, the natural shape of things is to become naturally a sphere, which is a circle. And there's all kinds of mathematical coincidence revolve around those dimensions as well. that only reinforce what we're saying about pattern, which is that you can't get away from them even.
No.
Like where there's no pattern sanctuary.
Like with patterns and cycles, circles, all of that, like would I be right in saying how I'm understanding both of you is imagine a circle with a swirl connected in the middle, all the way, swirl, and then the outer part is the cycle, the inner part is the pattern, the cycle within the cycle. And we're all at different places in there.
Yeah, I kind of see that, because when I think of a
Yeah.
pattern, it's a part of something, and the whole pattern together would be part of the cycle. The pattern is only part of the cycle, what we're seeing.
I agree.
I think we're all essentially saying the same thing, but we're on a different
Different
place
level,
in that
yeah.
swirl.
Yeah.
Depends where you stand.
Yeah, that's what's cool about it. Like I like that we're saying the same thing, but because it's coming from different perspectives, it's like what I guess some people would perceive as a violent. Like it almost sounds like we're arguing, but not. We're actually saying the same thing, which
Yeah,
is,
you never know that
I think
one person might say something that just completes the puzzle piece for another person to move on to the next part of the swirl.
it completes the cycle exactly.
And Annie's putting up her gifts. She's the gift master.
I'm liking the gifts.
Yeah, she's saying it in pictures for us. We got everything. She just said there, pattern, a wheel, and spiral flower pattern.
Well, that looks like Cubert. That was a good game.
So, all right. So we covered a lot of areas so far. So, do you think any cycles are permanent? Or what about temporary and permanent cycles? Do you think some cycles are actually only temporary, they disappear, or do you think that they're always there and they just take a background, and that cycles are permanent forever everywhere?
There are temporary cycles, but think of it this way: a temporary cycle would be like the difference between a second and a minute.
Still part of another cycle.
So, like, once you've gone through 60 seconds, there's no reason to have that. If you're gonna go for like 3 hours, there's no reason to have 60 seconds for every minute of that 3 hours. Once you reach a minute, that second cycle is no longer required. You just go by the minute. And then maybe after 10 minutes, you go by 10 minutes, right? So you just keep chopping cycles away but you're still, generally speaking, you're still using the same cycle. But there are temporary cycles, and that's to answer your question about temporary cycles. So yes, there are temporary cycles, but only for the moment.
Is it temporary?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, they won't always be there, but they'll be there sometimes.
I just think about when they made life. We just created life. We're going to put it in motion. Oh, look, it made a cycle. Hang on, it's going to make another one. I think we better keep making cycles because it just keeps moving along.
They should have stopped
more
it.
I
stuff.
see where you're going with that. No, that's okay. Well, that's a different way of looking at that question for sure. Yeah, I'm still gonna. Yeah, because once you get past a certain amount of cycles, there's no need for this cycle. So that's where you would draw the line. Is like, okay, seconds, minutes, hours.
And after that,
Until you reach the end of the cycle, it's still like there's way more.
Sorry, did I say draw the line? I meant say cut the line.
Yeah, draw the line. I've drawn lines before. I like to name it, All right, so I want to know more about, our lives. Now, do we see our lives as a straight line, birth to death, or do we see them as a cycle? And I suppose that would depend on what you believe and all that sort of stuff. But when I first thought of the question, like, I believe we're part of the great cycle, but my mind presented my life as a straight line from birth to death. I just drew a line and went, that's life. And I thought, no, life's a cycle. What's this impression we have on our minds that life is a line? Is it only because we're seeing a part of this great cycle? Is it easier to manage that way for us to
Well,
function?
okay, that's an interesting question because I don't view my life, like my time trajectory through this realm, as something that has been repeated. But if I look at the traits and the characteristics of both of my parents and look back on some of the things that I did or chose to do, like when I look back on it, I can see that there are cycles going on there. And so is that me? Is that because of my own mental constitution and I'm just making those up? Or like will my son go through the same sort of cyclical things at same points of his life? So I can't answer that yet. My son's not that old. But when he gets that old, I'll be able to answer that. And that's a question I got my eye on for sure, because I think that there could be cycles hidden within what would seem like straight lines to people. But if they just look back at their ancestry and how those people behaved, acted, chose to do things, they would see similarities and they would perhaps be able to put together some kind of cycle.
I actually see that in my family from stolen generation and stuff. I've noticed bits of that cycle, and that's why I posed the question, because I actually did see it. It's like, oh, you did that, and then your children did that, and now we're doing this, and it's part of whatever cycle got started in the first place.
Well, having 5 younger sisters, I've seen that frequently in the way that my parents behaved. Like comparing the way my sisters, because there's a huge generation. My youngest sister is like 16 years younger than me, I think, and you can see the cycles that they went through. Like, because I knew basically they went through the same cycles that my mother, is what I'm trying to get at without putting too much detail into it. But there's a notable, like, is that genetic, or was it taught somehow, or like
It's like, yeah.
like even
But
like
it's genetic as well. There's a lot of things that contribute to it, but I think we can all change it if we want to. And I'm only saying that from my own personal experience because I actually, I'm the black sheep of my family now. And that is because I stepped back and watched everyone doing the same thing, being miserable, repeating the same things. And I was like, hey, what's going on here? What are they all doing the same? So I stopped and I disconnected from that and those family members that contributed to that negativity and the toxicity. And my daughter is not now showing any of those behaviors because I've shown her something different.
yeah, well that's brilliant. So you possibly have maybe started a new cycle.
Can break the cycle, even though it's genetic. I mean, so many things make it up that it is alterable.
Well, see, okay, breaking the cycle, I understand the value in how that sounds, but maybe the idea is to steal the momentum of that cycle and shift its direction instead of breaking the cycle and then starting a whole new one. If that makes any sense.
Much better worded. Yeah, I agree.
But I mean, I don't know how that's done. But what I wanted to touch on was going back to like the genetic cycles. Like, what if there's cycles that have been programmed into your genetics, but they were programmed at a time where those cycles made sense, and now they don't make sense. And so genetics is trying to find ways to shift the momentum of those cycles, break them into different directions. And how are we going to be aware of something like that if we don't live long enough to see like the generational cycle? You know what I mean? Like, so there's some cycles there that I think we need to be aware of that we don't know are there.
You know, I can't answer that, and I don't have a lot to add to that personally. But I actually agree with it because when you tune in enough to yourself, you know, you got to get out. You've just got to get out of your own head to be able to do that. And I just listened and just trusted my instincts, and I ended up at a place that I'd never been before, and something kept taking me back to this place. And this was before I even knew about my culture. Something just kept drawing me there, drawing me there, drawing me there. And eventually I could hear the ancestors, my ancestors, that I didn't know were mine. And that's how I found my culture, my identity, my family, my country, because of those instincts getting out of my own head. So, and that's genetic.
Well, here's a question then. Looking back at all of the history in regards to cultural conflicts or revolutions or, you know, cultural shifts, is there a cycle going on there? Like, I honestly, this is an honest question because I don't know, but I'll bet if you look hard enough at all of the ancient religions or texts or everything, that you'll find cycles of information or minorities, like lesser people, whatever you want to call them. There's always the bad guy and the good guy, and the repressor and the oppressor. There's always that like dichotomy of a struggle in all these stories. Is that maybe not some kind of cyclical pattern in
Yeah,
itself?
it's called the cycles of the psychos.
You can't have one without the other.
Could be.
Not quite. Now, what I realised is, so we have cycles. The train left the station without me. Train left the station.
Stop the world, I want to get off.
Exactly, I wish. And can't get off. Is the cycle so running so fast that we can't get off without spinning right out?
Well, if we use an allegory of a tornado or a cyclone, you know, at some point when you're close enough to the tornado, it's absolute chaos and you're caught up in the ravaging winds of the cycle. But once you get into the eye of the storm, it's absolute calmness. You know, and that's kind of a good metaphor allegory of life. When you find yourself deep in the current of the cycle, you can be tossed around so much that you can almost not even recognize the cycle at all. But when you change your perspective, then you can either be in the center of it in the calmness or far enough away from it that you can just view the cycle. Because the most incredible gift I think we have as a species is pattern recognition. And I think pattern is just another semantics when it comes to a cycle.
You're cloning a cycle.
You just my thinking of the spiral thing. We don't start on the inside and go out, we go to outside and go in.
You know, back to the wheel where the middle of the wheel where the spokes come off, and what Nate was saying about the eye of the storm, the eye of the cyclone thing. Have we been tricked into running around the edges of the cycle when we should be standing in the middle the whole time? I'll use what Nase said about running around you're in a cyclone around and you don't know what's up and what's down. Are they really pushing us to the edges all the time to get us in that spin? Where we should be always in the middle, where the spokes start from.
You know that that image that we see of the snake eating its own tail?
Yep.
I think it's is it called the Orbeus?
Something
The Uberos?
Oh, that's gonna drive me crazy now.
Yeah, I know.
Ouroboros.
All right, someone find it quick.
What is it, Connie?
Ouroboros.
Ouroboros, yes.
That's
Thank
it.
you, Connie.
Thank you.
So if we get caught up in our two-dimensional perspective and we're looking down on the snake eating its tail, what if we turn the perspective 90 degrees and we realize because of the perspective of the observer, the snake isn't eating its tail, it's just a coil going around and around and around and around. And it just gives us that false perspective that it's eating its own tail when it's just coiling on itself. And if you go further down the coil, you find yourself, depending again on the perspective, in the past. Or if you go further up the coil, you find yourself in the presence. Because as an indigenous person, we talk about the 13 moons of the cycle of a year. You know, but we've been taught about this 12-month calendar. So then in actuality, in the greater cycle, it's 13 moons, and it's just a little bit more than it was before. And in that little bit of more, it seems like we're eating our own tail because we're so caught up in our perspective that we don't realize that it is more like a spiral, either going away from us or coming towards us.
I like that.
I'd like to offer another perspective on the whole snake thing eating its tail. And that is just if you rotate it the other way, it looks like he's puking out his own body instead of eating his own tail. So there's another perspective.
Yeah, you're talking about the swastika and the reverse.
Well, no, that's not what I'm talking about at all. All I'm talking about.
No, listen.
If you turn that snake eating its tail the other way, it looks like he's puking his butt. That's all. That's all I'm saying.
Right, but if you look at the symbol of the swastika, it's an ancient Indian from India symbol.
I'm not a Nazi.
And well, I am a Nazi. But so Hitler took that symbol because the Indian symbol meant the cycle of life. And there's two perspectives of looking at it. Because if you look at it two-dimensionally, it'll look like the swastika. But if you look at it from the other side, it's the reverse. And that is a representation of the cycle of life, how it kind of just keeps spinning like a fan or a spiral or the spokes of a wheel. Because one of the only reasons why the swastika has the 90-degree edges was because it was really difficult to chisel a curve into stone. And they were only able to chisel straight lines into stone without breaking the, whatever you're chiseling into.
Well, it wasn't hard for somebody.
Well, depending on your technological advancement, you can use laser beams and etch it in there, as there's examples of throughout the world.
Does the whirling rainbow come into that somewhere? Isn't that symbol like the
It's
whirling
everywhere
rainbow?
in everything.
Because I
And they all
know,
have different meanings.
yeah, the swastika, we know it was originally for peace.
But
And
the
maybe
bad guy symbol, that's isn't that also symbolic of the black sun?
I know, I think we're going in cycles here.
Well, one of the
But the sun has
oldest
cycles.
symbols, one of the simplest and oldest symbol found throughout the world is the spiral.
Yep.
And then on top of that is usually the circle that is dissected into fours, to where it has either like an X in the circle or a cross in the circle, or minimally on the perimeter of the circle, it'll have 4 divisions of the circle.
You know, what you're saying, they say, I'm seeing it in my head, it's all kind of fitting in, and they're showing me the snake from one perspective, and then they're moving me up and down. I can actually see it's a spiral.
Remember what I drew?
Oh yeah. Leah drew a picture.
Yeah.
But you can put it in chat room.
Can I help?
I don't know.
Yeah.
She drew a what?
She drew a picture to represent.
A what?
A picture.
Oh, it's the
It's
way
an
we.
art,
It's
an
our
art.
accent. It's the way. Say picture again.
Picture.
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 Picture. It's not
Picture.
picture. It's picture.
Oh, not a picture. I get it.
See
I don't know how to
see the little plus sign here.
Yeah.
If you press on that in the chat room, it'll go to your files, and then you can put the picture in.
Um,
So I'm seeing the snake, because one of my friends the other day, she's been talking about the snake biting its tail for the last year, right? And I've been looking at it from a flat perspective, where it actually looks like the snake's eating its tail, and I'm thinking, wow, that's not a really good way to end a cycle, because you're going to eat yourself. It's going to be destructive. But as you were all talking, they were showing me, they were moving me up and down to look at this thing from different angles, and I could actually see it, like Nate said, it's like once you move your perspective, you can see it's actually a spiral, which fits more better in with my understandings.
Wait, can I ask a question here about the snake thing? I was researched or guided to believe that that symbol represented like the cycle of life and rebirth, and to coincide with that, in nature, it's not uncommon to see a snake bite its own tail to help shed its old skin, because they do that. So it's kind of a metaphorical representation of shedding old skin for new life. And for whatever reason, they like to do it with snakes.
Yeah, poor snakes.
I mean, beyond that, it would be interesting to know. What I'm trying to imagine is when you say okay, you look at the snake from that view, but then when you I'm trying to imagine putting that snake there and then swiveling around Matrix style 3-dimensionally, and I'm having a hard time visualizing what it would like.
Spiral. That's what I see.
But I don't think it would look like a spiral unless you were at the exact same angle that you needed it to look like a spiral.
That's what I'm saying.
If you you remember a slinky?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it would look like a slinky. And if you take a slinky, and I know this because I've done this, but so say if you have a loft, and then if you're up on the top of the loft, and then you let the slinky all the way loose, and you look down the center of the slinky towards the other end, it will give you the impression that it's a spiral when actually it's just a coil. Because you know how when you are drawing and you draw a road, and to denote distance, the road comes together as a point. And that's kind of like the same thing when you look down the slinky, that its furthest point away from you, it almost looks like it's come together. Does that
Right.
make a
So
sense?
no, it does make sense. But the question I would have would be that the snake mounds that we're talking about here, I'm pretty sure, they're not straight. So you would only be able to see past the first curve. That's it. Like you would, as soon as it curved once, that's it. You'd be done. Like you'd see like whatever halfway down the snake's neck, and then the rest of it still curvy and winding. Like, so how would you orientate that snake so you could see all the way down to the end?
Well, that's when you're thinking of looking down the snake's gobstopper.
Or yeah, or whatever angle. Like that's what I mean. Like it's hard for me to visualize that.
And this is the beauty about, I don't know if you guys remember during Kev Baker's show once when Jimmy Jeans was on there, and I was trying to explain to them about, straightening the curve, because the powers that should not be, they hate curves. Because when you come up around the bend, you have no idea what's around the bend. So if they can smash that curve and make it more of a line of sight, that's the best way that you can shoot somebody, is to have direct line of sight. And so the powers that should not be, they want to have more straight lines so they can go from point A to point B without surprises, as you do going around the corner or coming around the bend where there's a possible surprise.
I agree. Because
Yeah.
there's no straight lines in nature. That's how you can pick out man-made stuff from natural things.
I challenge anybody here to come up with a better toy that signifies cycles that's better than a slinky.
Have you got one in mind, Polly?
The only thing that comes to mind is maybe a ball.
No.
But no, slinky's better. But that would be my second guess. I don't know.
What about the spirograph?
You spotted that's a game.
Yeah, okay. I'd put that in the top 5.
A fuzzy
Or the
rabbit.
gyroscope.
The Heroescope?
They are so fun.
Well, what have we got here? We've come past the hour. We're coming up to an hour and a half. So, okay, everyone. Let's sum up our conversation this evening. It's been pretty interesting, and it's all given me. It's actually helped me out, this conversation, to put some things in perspective. I'm not so shocked when I look at the snake eating itself anymore.
Yeah, the snake definitely has been given a bum rap.
It sure has, man. Everything gets blamed on the snake. Sure has a bum rap. Next to that's the spider. And that's what I want to do before we move on. The spider, it makes its web in a cycle, a spiral and a circle, even though there's straight lines in it. And that's a different twist on things. And also,
Yeah, it's almost like the nature's representation of the Fibonacci sequence.
Yeah. It's amazing what they do there. So, all right, so we'll go through the finishing, last thoughts, anything you want to add to the topic cycles? Anyone get first, Jules?
No, I was just gonna say, I was thinking, and cycles, I have a new appreciation for cycles. And I had a thought that there is a circle of life, there's a cycle of life, and we are cycling through. And if you're lucky, you can still ride a bike bicycling through the circle of life.
Oh, wow. I noticed you were sitting back there all quiet, Jules, putting on your wise hat. She's growing before our eyes.
No, I've got some news I got to share with you guys, and I was just kind of waiting till we stop recording because it's kind of personal to all of us.
Yeah. All right, so we're going to wrap up now.
When I'm bigger and I'm proficient on my tricycle, I'm going to have a bicycle.
But it takes real skill to master a unicycle.
Hey, all right. Polly, you want a cycle discussion? How do we end this?
Yeah, this was a really cool one. Because I still can't think of anything that doesn't have a cycle in it.
And we can always revisit this subject since it's so vast. And I'd love, like, other minds would have other views.
And that's even weirder because if we keep revisiting this subject, then that's kind of a cycle too, isn't it?
I feel like I've been told.
What are we all nuts?
Meet everybody, and thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming, daughter. Now you're on Discord, you can come.
Oh, it was nice to meet you too.
Yeah,
that's
it
one
was
thing I wanted to say.
fantastic.
Because new faces are
It was
always
a joy
awesome.
meeting you.
Well, if we take the parameter of the cycle with its diameter as the wait, let me rephrase that.
Yeah, don't
If you
take my
take
diameter.
the nomenclature of the circle and use it as a cycle and have as a denominator against the distance or diameter measurement within the equation, we can find the exponential rate of change that can occur either positively, negatively, or neutrally, depending on your perspective as you're eating your own cherry pie.
Nope. I'm gonna stop that. That's like
And that equation doesn't work unless you have whipped cream also.
You make me hungry. You'll bring in lunch next time. Okay. Well, I want to thank everyone for participating today in Conversation Cycle. I want to thank you for listening out there, and I hope you come back next week and listen again. And I want to thank Creator for making all this possible. Anyone else before we finish? Want to throw something in? No? Okay. Well, thank you for being part of Discord discussions. We'll see you next week. Love to you on this day. Yalu.
Yalu.